And then inshallah, we're going to have Sister Noor, who also works with CAIR, come up and answer some questions, especially relevant to the advocacy that's happening for Palestine, about what rights we have as students, as protesters, as advocates. And yeah, inshallah, it'll be very beneficial. So, jazakumullah khair to you both. And inshallah.
السلام عليكم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله الطاهرين وصحبه الطيبين والتابعين لهم بخير وإحسان إلى يوم الدين وعلينا معهم وفيهم برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين يا أرحم الراحمين يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم إنا نسألك علما نافعا ونعوذ بك من علم لا ينفع. ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب. So this is our third session in regards going over sacred activism in kind of a conjoining of what CAIR Michigan has done historically with our Muslim Youth Leadership Symposiums in regards to discussing activism, advocacy, and community organizing from an Islamic perspective. And then also comments based upon the book that I wrote towards sacred activism. So the comments will be coming from there. We've wrapped up, we've covered the major portions of the primer. And there's a couple of things that I want to reiterate very briefly. But the bulk of what we're going over today is the last two chapters of the book in regards to giving tangible examples about the differences between allyship and coalition. And then also the issue of what I think is one of the most neglected issues for activists is spiritual self-care. People talk about self-care, but there's something that we would like to discuss in regards to spiritual self-care. So, and of course we know what's going on in Palestine right now in Gaza. We know this is a Nakba, and how we deal with the issue in Palestine is also a test for us in two regards. Palestine is a test for us in two regards. It's for number one, it is a test for us about how we are going to respond in giving help to our brothers and sisters there. And then second, it's a test for us in the sense that anti-Palestinian, anti-Arab, and anti-Muslim animus is on the rise in America, including in our state of Michigan and including on this campus, right? So where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is testing us. So we, inshallah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to pass the test. So as we mentioned in regards to coalitions and alliances, just as a refresher, the allyship is based upon the Islamic framework of wala, a spiritual affinity. And we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, al-mu'minun mu'minat ba'duhum awliya'u ba'd, that believing men and believing women are allies of one another. And this allyship is based upon, number one, bihubbi wa sadaqa. As the scholars have said, of wala is based upon love and fealty, right? Then also in the allyship, it is also sticking to an-nusra. These are the components of help or aid or assistance or great need to one's allies. And in this sense, complete allyship is with believers, and that's based upon a common faith, common faith-driven objectives with a common baseline of sacred values. Then coalitions are those people, or maybe we're not starting from the same place, nor are we trying to get to the same place, and ultimately in all matters or all things, but we have some specific issues that we can work together, in which people in the coalition are trying to get to those same places. Alliances or allyship are more permanent in nature, whereas coalitions are temporary in nature. Like once the objective is met, there's no more need for the coalition. The coalition's over. But allyship is enduring. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the Quran, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, wa la tattakhidhu yahuda wa nasara awliya, ba'duhum awliya ba'd. Do not take others as unconditional allies. They are allies of one another. And al-kufru millatun wahida. Disbelief is one path. Notice Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not make a distinction between these two groups. Because al-kufr millatun wahida min aqwal al-nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Because those who are in disbelief is one path. It's one path. It's one path. Now, in regards to this issue of protesting in Palestine, as we mentioned before, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala clearly says that for us, that there's certain things we cooperate with people with, and there's other things we don't cooperate with people on, right? And this informs the objective and the means of making the objective. وَتَعَوْنُوا عَلَى الْبِرِّ وَالتَّقْوَى وَلَا تَعَوْنُوا عَلَى الْإِثْمِ وَعُدْوَانِ. Cooperate with each other based upon al-bir, righteousness. Those things are based in facts and truth. Those things are permissible. And regardfulness for God. And don't cooperate with each other or people based upon matters that are false, that are sinful, that are haram, nor cooperate with people upon any things that disrespect or take people away from the remembrance of Allah. Right? So there is no quid pro quo. Now, in this issue of Palestine, we're seeking to raise our voices. We want justice for the Palestinians, right? Ultimately, and the first thing is the bloodshed to stop, isn't that right? That's the first thing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands in the Quran, right? It says, and do not kill any soul except with that which is right. Whoever kills an innocent person, it's like they killed all of humankind, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, right? And the life of one Palestinian person is more sacred than any land, by the way. Keep in mind, we have a hierarchy of priorities. Life, even in Maqasid al-Sharia, and nafs, hizl nafs comes before hizl mal. The protection of life is a maqsad before the protection of property, the protection of land. So one day the Prophet ﷺ was with his Sahaba at the Fath Mecca. They were making tawaf. And he says to the Sahaba, Il mu'minun a'zamu hurmatan min al-Ka'bah, that one believer in his or her importance is more sacred than the Kaaba. Another riwayah, he points towards the Kaaba, speaking to the Kaaba, say, and one believer is more sacred than you, O Kaaba. We know al-Mashal Haram is more sacred than al-Mashal Aqsa, isn't that right? Land is most sacred. And by the way, dealing with each other as Muslims in activism and organizing spaces, if we understood the hurma of the believer, we'd be very more careful not to disrespect each other in regards to our community organizing and activism. Your brother and sister's honor is more sacred than any piece of land. including the brother and sister you're organizing with. Whether you like them personally or not, that's inconsequential. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given them a hurma as a human being, and there is more hurma for this person who is a mu'min or a mu'minah. This is a very important principle. So now we have to be careful for two things. Number one, that we don't, in seeking to get a cause that we want to a good outcome, that we don't compromise it, or we can say ruin it by inserting a haram in it, even if it's a noble objective, because the ends don't justify the means, right? Bringing haram in speech or deed into a righteous cause, it corrupts the objective, just as pouring vinegar on honey. And this is actually a similitude that's used in some of our books. You can have sweet honey. If you pour some apple cider vinegar into a jar of honey, that honey is ruined. That which used to be sweet tastes horrible. That which could be preserved for a long time becomes rancid and gets spoiled. That's what vinegar does, the honey. Likewise, mixing a haram in means, in speech and deed, corrupts the cause. Number two, we have to make sure that our movements don't get, or what we're doing doesn't get co-opted by people who have other agendas in the name of so-called solidarity. So let me be directly to the point. I'm gonna give you some examples that have taken place just recently around the country, including here in Michigan, in regards to what we have to be careful about so that we aren't involved in promoting munkar in the name of our activism, that we don't involve ourselves in violations. For instance, there was a protest just recently, and I'm reading verbatim, and you have people in the front. I don't know if any of them are Muslim or not, but they're holding a sign, "Reproductive justice means free Palestine," and there's a Palestinian flag on that. Reproductive justice means free Palestine. This is when other movements in the name of progressivism come and try to hijack the message and the means of what this is about. We're literally trying to stop ethnic cleansing taking place in Palestine. What does so-called reproductive justice have to do for that? Would the people of Palestine even be advocating for so-called reproductive justice? And even the term is tricky. What is reproductive justice? It is advocating for the legality of unrestricted abortion, which actually is not even reproduction. It's trying to stop reproduction.
Mom, I just have one thing. The one thing that I've heard about that specifically is that sometimes Palestinians that have been in prison for long periods of time have like sperm transferred out to keep people going, keep the Palestinians going. I've seen that framed in that sense specifically.
Yeah, and right behind it, there's a sign that says "Lesbians for Liberation." That's not what this is about. They're not trying to preserve the sperm or the nutfa. No, yeah, but that's what's called diversion. That's not really what's for. What these people are marching for is that they're against the overturning of Roe v. Wade, and they're trying in their intersectional agenda, they're trying to use the suffering and the blood of Palestinians to lift up that issue. Just like with BLM and Black Lives Matter, and then people start going around saying Black Trans Lives Matter. Last time I checked, George Floyd was a heterosexual man. He was not trans or identifying as trans. He had nothing to do with the LGBTQ movement. And they were doing it. This is a way that they try to to derail movements or try to inject their cause and to get sympathy for their cause when it has nothing to do with the facts on the ground of what's going on. Because what they say, and this stems from, and notice this too, let me say this too. Everything has a sened, a chain of transmission, whether you realize it or not. The Senate may go back to Foucault. The Senate may go back to Karl Marx, but there's a Senate in regards to the worldview, right? Critical gender studies has a Senate back to critical theory. Critical theory is the outgrowth of Marxism. So everything has a Senate. It's just whether your Senate goes back to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or does it go back to Karl Marx? Does it go back to Foucault? Is your Sheikha Gloria Steinem? Everything has a chain of transmission in all of these intellectual currents. So my point is, we have to be careful in two things. Number one, if people want to protest and call for a ceasefire of Palestine or dignity for Palestinians, if they're sincere about it, ahlan wa sahlan, right? But the main thing is, it should not be conditioned to quid pro quo. In other words, because we stood for Palestine, then we are obligated to stand with other people on X, Y, Z. No, we're dealing with Palestine. If they're sincere, then they will show their so-called solidarity about this issue. If they're sincere, if there's conditions, we don't need it, right? And we should never feel obligated to promote haram in the name of a cause. In fact, it's haram for us to promote haram, right? Number two, in regards to being co-opted, if people show up for our protests or our rally, we should be discerning about who we invite, and we should also have our own security and police what type of messages. Because we also have some Muslims who will do some messaging and say certain things that we don't want. We don't need anyone going to the president of University of Michigan's office and saying F education, Nazi occupation. It's actually happened. You don't want to equate anything relating to Jewish people with Nazis. That is not intelligent. That's not wise. And also chants such as, like in Dearwood, Khaybar, Khaybar, Ya Yahud. What? Why are you chanting that? Our issue is not with Jewish people. Our issue is with them, with illegal occupation, with murder. We're not at war with Jewish people. We have Jewish voices of peace. We have Jewish friends and coalition partners who are getting arrested for Palestine. In DC, they're in downtown Detroit protesting. I know some of these Jewish people. Jewish people aren't the enemy. Illegal occupation, neo-colonial settler, like colonization, occupation. That's the issue. It's not Jewish people, right? So we have to be able to police, and even to be frank with you, sometimes as Muslims, the people who are trying to walk the Quran and Sunnah and trying to be faithful to this deen, sometimes even people who call themselves cultural Muslims or secular Muslims don't necessarily need the microphone. That's even a bigger problem than Qawm Huruf. You know what I mean by Qawm Huruf, right? I think I explained what I mean by that, right? A huruf in Arabic means letters. It's the people of letters.
Yeah.
Correct. Because back in the time of Sayyidina Lut, alayhi salam, it was just one letter. Now there's many letters. And they keep adding letters. I can't even keep with all the letters. So, again, when we're in coalition with people, we have to be clear on our principles, we set our platform, and make sure that we're not underneath other people's umbrellas. If we see another agenda. For instance, if there is a protest about Palestine, but it's being propagated or organized by a group whose primary issue is something else that's haram, we would not join that. Let them do their own thing. We shouldn't join it. Let them speak, let them do their thing. Let them do their thing. We don't have to join and mix in it, because that's giving de facto coverage to it, or it may seem as implicit endorsement of that other thing they're waving a flag for or trying to propagate. So we have to be careful about that and not being used for other people's agendas. I can get into it more because I learned years ago about something that's called grief circles, and when certain groups literally see a group that is in trouble or in battle in a certain situation, and they go there strategically to lift up their issue and to fly certain flags and to say certain slogans in order to promote their issue. It's not really about the actual people who are suffering. Believe me when I tell you. I learned this years ago without getting the specifics right now, but I can talk about it later, inshallah. So, coalitions. Now, I want to read something else before I go to spiritual self-care. This is a very important principle, and the reference is الفتى الرباني وفيض الرحماني للسيد عبد القادر الجيلاني الحسني الحسيني. It is the lordly opening and the merciful flood. Maybe it's the way I translate it, or the merciful outpouring. I think it's also translated as sublime revelation, but I don't like that term revelation because this book isn't Wahi, but I think it's been translated this. By Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, one of the great Gnostics and knowers of God. This is, for your reference, the 36th Majlis, a Majlis al-Sadis al-Thalathun. I'm going to read some of this in Arabic and translate. The English translation of this is it's okay, but you can get this book in Arabic from like Dar al-Kutub al-Umiyya, or you can go to neilwafarat.com or something like that, and you can get a copy of it. قال الشيخ رضي الله عنه لا تظلم غيرك فإن ظلم ظلمات في الدنيا والآخرة. All right, do not commit wrong from others to others, for surely dhulm or wrong is darkness in the dunya and the akhirah. Now, as I mentioned, dhulm, lughawi speaking, is to take something outside of its proper place. So oppression or wrong is when you take away someone's what? Their God-given rights. This is in the broadest sense. Sometimes people would say something is dhulm, but it's not a God-given right. Right? So they say, I am owed this particular land, it's my right. It's my undeniable, incontrovertible right. Well, maybe that's not a God-given right. I can be whatever I want to be. I can say whatever I want to say, identify whatever I want to say. And people try to make that a justice issue. They say, if you don't let me have this land, that's dhulm. If you don't let me identify as if you don't let me identify as a wolf or a cat, that's dhulm. That's not a God-given right. So we have to be clear on what we're talking about from the sacred law. الظلم يظلم القلب ويسود الوجه والصحائف. Dhulm darkens the heart and the countenance and one's book of deeds. ولا تعاون ظلما. And do not assist wrongdoers. فإن النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم يا ننادي منادي يوم القيامة أين الظلمة. And there will be a crier out on the day of resurrection, meaning an angel, who will say, where are the oppressors? Aina a'wanul zolama. And where are the helpers of the oppressors? Ijma'uhum waj'aluhum fi tabatin min nar. He said, these people who are the wrongdoers, the helpers of the wrongdoers, excuse me, wa aina man yura lahum qalama. أين من لاقى لهم دوات اجمعهم واجعلهم في تابة من نار. An angel will cry out on the day of resurrection and say, where are the wrongdoers? Where are the helpers of the wrongdoers? Where are those who were apathetic when wrong was going on? They did nothing to stop the wrong. Bring them all together, all these groups of people, and make them reside in the fire. Then the Sheikh says, احرب من الخلق واشهد أن لا تكون مظلوما ولا ظالما وإن كذبت فكن مظلوما ولا تكن ظالما. Allahu Akbar. Free from mixing with the people, meaning overly mixing with people, and strive not to be oppressed nor an oppressor. But if you could choose, then be oppressed and do not be an oppressor. مقرورا ولا تكن قاهرا نصرة الحق للمظلوم ولا سيما إذا لم يجد ناصرا من الخلق. If you had a choice between being mazlum and being zalim, be mazlum and don't be zalim. And do not be repressive in seeking to get the rights of the mazlum, especially when you see no human helper for the people. It is very important. Again, we can commit dhulm and wrongdoing in the name of helping people who are mazlum. These are not mutually exclusive identities, is the point. So again, the ends do not justify the means in our activism. And this especially, the Sheikh is saying, especially when it appears to be that the people aren't coming to the help of the people. So then we can justify, well, we have to do this because we see no other people really helping these people. We see Palestine and we see that the Arabs totally surround Palestine and none of the governments are helping them. The Egyptian government has the Rafah border closed. Egypt has the largest military of any Arab country. مش نصرة. جيش لبنان مش موجودة. جيش سوري هنا جيش سوري. جيش أردني where are these Arabs at? Where are these Muslimin at? Nowhere. But then the Sheikh says, أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أنه قال إذا ظلم من لم يجد ناصر غير الحق تعالى فإنه يقول أنصرنك ولا بعد حين. Allahu Akbar. Hadith Qudsi. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says that when the oppressed do not find any helper amongst the people, and there is none to help except al-Haq Ta'ala, except God, who is the one that gives the rights the Most High, then Allah Himself will say, most certainly I will give you divine assistance, even if there is a lapse of time. Even if some time goes by, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Himself will intervene in the affair. I ask you this, brothers and sisters in Islam, and I say this, it's not a question, it's more of a rhetorical question. Do we have to make tawbah as activists for doubting the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? We think of tawbah as just making tawbah from big sins. Outwardly, drinking alcohol, backbiting, committing zina, using profanity. We think about these sins. But we also have to make tawbah for the inward states. Do we actually believe that the Quran and the Sunnah work? Do we actually believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke the truth and will not break His promise? Do we believe that Al-Habib, Al-Mustafa Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, all of what he said that we could authenticate is the truth? That his actions are the best way about how we go about getting justice? Or do we think that we have another better way than the way of the Quran and better way than Al-Habib Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa sallam? not theoretically of what we say, but actually in our hearts and how we behave as activists? Will we justify the injustifiable in the name because we say, oh, we don't see any Nasr? So this is what the saying says. إذا ظلم لم يجد ناصرا غير الحق تعالى فإنه يقول أنصرنكم ولو بعد حين. This is a spiritual problem, right? So this takes us into spiritual self-care. SubhanAllah, we talk about organizing methods, talking points. This is actually a very small part of the activism. It's a very small part of the activism. I'm going to mention some points directly from my book, and then we'll conclude about spiritual self-care. And based upon our teachers, I've looked at 12 points we need to focus on for our spiritual self-care as activists to keep us grounded and that we don't burn out, because activist burnout is real. Right? People give up hope. What I'm not doing is not making a difference. We are all tilling soil. Khadija, Sayyidatuna Khadija alayha salam, the best of Azwaj al-Nabi, after Azwaj al-Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam. She died in complete poverty, boycotted when Muslims were starving, before the 5 daily prayers were even made obligatory. Yet, she gets a share of Fath Mecca. She gets a share of Khilafah, even though she not physically lived to see the conquest of Mecca. She didn't even live to see Hijrah. She didn't live to see the conquest of Mecca. She didn't live to see the Sahaba go into Al-Quds and pray in Masjid al-Aqsa. She never lived to see that. Yet she gets a share of that. Maybe we're doing work and we won't see. Dunya, we speaking what we're striving towards. It's our job to have a noble objective, clean intentions, and use sacred means. Those are only 3 things. The results with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they manifest due to His divine decree and His ultimate wisdom. We are not the ultimate determiner of outcomes. Once we understand that, that will free us from a lot of hopelessness, and that ultimate justice is on the day of judgment. I mean, perfect justice. There's no perfect justice in the dunya. See, those people who are materialistic in mindset or secular, like atheists, Arabs, some people can justify the ends, justify the means, or do whatever because they have no belief and concept of akhirah. So they have to get everything right now. If they don't get what they want right now, they feel like they've been defeated, that they've lost. That's not the Muslim attitude. Spiritual self-care, number 1. Strive to fulfill the fara'id, starting with the 5 daily prayers. What good is it to say free, free Palestine, don't even make your 5 daily prayers? Or what good is it to advocate for Palestine and leaving off the fara'id of this deen and going to hellfire in the next life? Abadan. Khalidina fiha abada. What good is that? What good is that? Our ultimate goal is Allah. It's not anything dunyawi. Our real maqsad is Allah. That's our objective. Ilahi anta maqsudi wa ridaka matlubi. This is a saying of Shah Naqshband. Qaddasallahu ruha. Oh my God, you are my objective and your felicity is my desire. Allah is the aim. Freedom of Palestine is something secondary. And actually justice after Allah. Free Palestine is tertiary, something called a Palestinian state. That land, until about 99 years ago, had always been known as Surya Kubra or Bilad al-Sham. In the time of the Prophet ﷺ, it was Sham. Jordan, Lebanon, Palestine, Syria, Bilad al-Sham. That's how the Sahaba referred to that land, Bilad al-Sham. And to strive to make these prayers in congregation is even better. But make sure we have to, but before we're striving for some greater social justice cause, alaykum anfusakum, ya ayyuhalladhina amanu alaykum anfusakum. Oh, you who believe, look after yourselves. This is the first command. We have to look after our own souls. Number 2, be very careful about your suhbah. And when you're involved in activism, one of the worst things an activist can do is keep suhbah only with fellow activists. You get stuck in the activist silo, especially if they're wokey wokes. Your suhbah is essential. The Prophet ﷺ in the hadith sahih في المستدرك على الصحيحين, the Sheikh al-Hakim and Nisaburi rahimahullah ta'ala, and Abi Dhar al-Ghifari radhiyallahu anhu. The Prophet said, solitude is better than being in bad company, and being in righteous company with the salihin is better than being in solitude, right? Being alone is better than being in bad company. But being in righteous company is better than being alone. So as an activist, we have to be very careful about the company that we keep and that we sit in righteous company, right? People who go to remember us about Allah and his messenger, alayhi afdalus salam, and are not caught up into frivolity, who are not engaged in vulgarity. One of the things that disturbs me a lot is in the name of looking socially conscious or woke, you see Muslim activists dropping F-bombs and being real casual about their language and riding around listening to munkarat. What is that? If you stay around it too long, that will corrupt you. We are all influenced by our environment. The ahwal of others affects us positively or negatively. If you're around people who are striving this deen with sound spiritual states, then we will benefit from their sound spiritual states in those hearts. If we're around people who are corrupted, their very presence will cause us detriment. Like they say, one rotten apple in a barrel can spoil a bunch. So get the rotten apple out of the barrel. Stay away from the rotten apple. Now I had that other part on. Number 3, this is so essential. Take a spiritual mentor or a spiritual guide. We all need teachers. Ahlul Sufiya has a saying that says, and the one who doesn't have a sheikh has taken shaitan as his sheikh. Because then you are left to yourself with your own devices, which then shaitan whispers into all of our inward selves, onto our hearts, right? And what in sudur an-nas, and then we have our own nufus, our own egos. So in order for us to help us with ourselves, is that we need spiritual guides and mentors. Every single one of us needs it, especially an activist. Let me paint a picture for you. Surah Kaf, I mentioned this before in here. Surah Kaf mentions this. Nabi Allah Musa alayhi salam is mentioned in a chapter called The Cave. He sought out a spiritual guide. He was a messenger of God. He had a book ended up being revealed to him. He took on a spiritual guide before he went and confronted Pharaoh, Fir'aun. Musa alayhi salam kana ma'suman. He's a prophet who is ma'soom. None of us are ma'soom or ma'sooma. None of us are getting a book revealed to us. So isn't it foolish to think that we could do this so-called speaking truth to power without spiritual guidance when a prophet of Allah, one of Ulul Azm min al-Rusul, himself had a spiritual guide? Isn't that foolish? So we need spiritual guides. We need advice. We need this to ask questions and be given advice, but also to tame our own egos. Su ego es no su amigo. Your ego is not your friend. The Prophet ﷺ said in this statement, the hadith starts off, the greatest adversary of your enemies is an-nas bina janbayn, is your soul in between your two sides, your ego. Your ego is your biggest enemy. Your ego, my ego, is a bigger enemy than the shaitan. The ego is a bigger enemy than shaitan. So we need spiritual guides. What is next? Get a daily litany or a spiritual routine to read, especially after times of Fajr and Maghrib. We need to be in the habit of doing dhikr of Allah. So after our obligatory prayers, we do dhikr. Al-Khalifatul Rashid, Al-Khalifatul Khamis, Al-Hassan ibn Ali. He even advised for women who are on their haid, even on their cycle. You can't pray, but during those prayer times, you should still take time to sit aside and do dhikr Allah. Because you can't, according to Sharia, make the salah, but dhikr is mutlaq, is unrestricted. Dhikr is unrestricted. So in that time when people are making Isha, do dhikr. Don't be on the phone gossiping or watching TV. Even though you can wake up for Fajr and sleep in, it's actually better for you to wake up for Fajr and do dhikr at that time. It's better for you. Of course, you have the ruqsa, you can sleep you can sleep in, but it's better for you to wake up for Fajr. Number 5, attempt to fast at least 3 days of every Islamic month. This is the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And fasting is a shield, and it is a junnah, and fasting also helps us with our discipline. And fasting helps us cultivate sabr. And sabr is in 3 things. Sabr is sticking and fulfilling the commandment of Allah, number 1. Is sabr in ta'ah. Then it is sabr from staying away from the prohibitions. And 3 is sabr in al-masa'ib, having patience when calamities come. These 3 are all needed right now. Patience in sticking to the commandment of Allah, patience in staying away from the prohibitions of Allah, instead of thinking we can take an easier, softer way, or we can cut corners and violate the Sharia, and patience when trials come. Fasting assists with that. 6, strive to be involved in some structured acquisition of knowledge. As I mentioned before, it is a prerequisite of enjoining good and forbidding evil that one must know the rulings around the good that they are advocating for and for the evil they're advocating against. And Sidi Ahmed Zaruq al-Maliki, rahmatullahi ta'ala, said it is impermissible for anyone to proceed in an endeavor until they learn the ruling of Allah pertaining to it. So we have to be involved in learning. We need some basic aqeedah. We need to know our basic aqeedah 101. We need to know the general rules, and this is not done by picking up books by oneself. One must be in some sort of structured classes, just like you're in structured classes here at the University of Michigan. Ann Arbor, you need to be in some structured Islamic classes with a qualified teacher. I don't mean any popular speaker that's on YouTube or Facebook or has a large Instagram following or TikTok. Someone with ijaza that has permission and qualifications. And any teacher should be able to tell you the books they read and who their mashayikh. I can tell you my teachers and the books that I wrote, their transmissions. Right? And if someone and if they can't tell you that, they're not people to learn from. And a PhD in Western academia and Islamic sciences does not equal having proper qualifications Islamically. Now, a person can have Senate connection and have a secular PhD, but a secular PhD in Islamic studies is not ilm. It's not ilm. It's not sacred knowledge. As a matter of fact, you could go astray by taking Islamic study classes in these institutions without any grounding knowledge. Number 7, call upon Allah to send frequent blessings and peace upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. As-salatu al-Nabi, or in Urdu, Durud Sharif, often. Hadith and Ubay ibn Ka'b radiallahu anhu. Ubay ibn Ka'b, one of the magnificent companions, asked the Prophet one day, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, fi hadith mashhur, O Prophet, should I make 1/3 of my prayer, meaning my dua, 1/4 of my dua for you? The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, if you wish, but if you increase, that'd be better. He said, what about 1/2? The response was, as you wish, but if you increase, that would be better. He said, what about 2/3? If you wish, but if you increase, that would be better. Ubay said, what if all of my supplication was salah upon you? He said, that would suffice to remove your worries and to forgive you of your sins. It would suffice to remove your ham and to remove your dhanb. And as-salatu nabi is the quickest way of one raising their maqam, their spiritual station. This is what our scholars say. It's the quickest way. It's the most effective way. What is the sigha of this? Hadith mutawatir. قالت الصحابة يا رسول الله كيف نصلي عليك؟ فقال النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم قولوا اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم. They asked, how do we send salah upon you, O Prophet? He said, say, O Allah, send blessings upon Muhammad and the family of Muhammad, just as you have sent blessings upon Ibrahim and the family of Ibrahim. And this is also, until you find a spiritual mentor or a guide, your spiritual mentor or your sheikh should be as-salatu nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So I'm giving you permission, or telling you, or I'm advising you to do this 1,000 times per day. And on Yom al-Jum'ah, Laylatul Jum'ah, Yom al-Jum'ah, increase it. Try to do it 2,000 times, 1,000 times at night, 2,000 times during the day. After Asr prayer, do it 80 times minimum. This is my advice. If you do this regularly, sincerely, you will see the change in your state. You will see the change in your state. Perhaps you even may have a dream of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that should be all of our yearning. You want to be with your beloved, isn't that right? If you love someone, don't you want to be close to him? Don't you want to see Al-Habib sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Number 8, take periodic retreats. And this includes detoxing from these so-called smartphones. We look at too many images. It's not good for our hearts, especially if we are on Instagram or TikTok. If you are scrolling through there, you will end up looking at something haram. You know, most of us on, especially for you brothers, if you have social media, TikTok or Instagram, you probably, without having the intention, in 1 month, you probably have seen more skin of non-mahram women than people 100 years ago would see in their entire life. Much less just going to the grocery store in the summertime. You see more skin of non-mahram women perhaps in 1 day than 100 years ago in Turkey or in Syria. People would go their entire life and not see that much skin of a non-mahram women. And then we wonder why people are so sexualized these days, because we've been desensitized to how much haram that we see. We've been desensitized to it. It's become adi. But really, we've come to accept unacceptable. Like what we've normalized is actually abnormal historically. I have a couple more, and then I'll have Sister Noor come up here with me. We answer any questions. Resist the urge to respond to every controversial event that comes on your radar, especially when feeling enraged. There's a time to speak, a time to remain silent, and the wisdom is knowing when. We don't have to respond to everything. We don't have to be quick for everything. We have to learn how to be cautious and judicious in how we respond to things. We can't respond to everything based upon anger. Anger has two parts. There's ghadab, there's mahmud, that's praiseworthy, and then there's ghadab that is blameworthy. So one we could translate as righteous indignation, and the other one is rage. And rage will take us into excesses, into sin. If we lack any sort of anger, this is also an infamy of the soul. This means if we had no anger about anything, that means we would have no sense of justice and we have no ghaira. Like a dayuth has no rage, like basically a sissy. Like if a man has no ghaira, like if he has a wife and he just let any guy like talk to his wife and smile up in his face or hug on her, he's a dayuth. He's a punk. That's unnatural. No man wants any, and likewise for a woman, like she doesn't want like some dude, she doesn't want like, well, a dude too, just some, guys that like guys, but I meant to say women. She doesn't want women smiling all up in her man's face and trying to hug up on him and stuff like that, or touching on her husband, some like random woman. No real woman wants to see women coming up to her husband like that. Right? Number 10, remind yourself that outcomes of matters are with Allah. And I mentioned this earlier. I began with this, but this was the first thing. And this doesn't mean that we are apathetic. We put forth effort. So, Hadith Mashur, the Arab came to the Prophet ﷺ, and he had the she-camel. So, oh messenger of God, should I tie her up or trust that God will protect my camel? فقال عليه السلام اعقلها وتوكل. Tie her up and simultaneously trust in God. The outcome is with God, right? You could tie up your she-camel and what? You're asleep, someone could come and untie your camel and steal your camel. Maybe you don't tie the knot tight enough and the camel gets loose. You're not guaranteed to have your camel, but at least you have to take the steps to tie your camel up. Isn't that right? Your camel could get loose, could break loose. Maybe the camel comes and gnaws off the rope and gets loose. Someone steals the camel, whatever, cuts the rope. But we have to do our due diligence. But the ultimate outcomes of all endeavors with Allah, not with us. Remember that. Number 11, avoid notoriety. Fame can be like a drug. Imam Ghazali writes about this, hubbul jah. The love of fame is a spiritual disease. One of the worst things you can do as an activist is be taking selfies and posting every little single thing you do. And also what we've been told by our spiritual teachers, avoid speaking in the first person as much as possible. Avoid the first person approach. I, my work, my case, my rally. I did this. I organized this. No, speak in the we. If you work for an organization, speak on behalf of your organization. One of the biggest infamies that afflicts the soul is when people speak in the I. Why? Because speaking in first personal pronoun is the discourse of Iblis. قال أنا خير منه خلقتني من نار وخلقته من طين. He said, what do you say to Allah? I am better than him. You created me a fire. You create him from the clay. So our scholars say avoid as much as possible speaking in the first person. Now, in these speakers trainings, activism trainings, they say, oh, speak your truth. Tell your story. We should only mention ourselves when it's absolutely necessary. We don't go around self-aggrandizement, posting our pictures and selfies of everything. Or they say, oh, I'm so humbled to have gotten this award. And you post a picture. No, you're not humble at all. You were just taking the award. You wouldn't be posting, oh, I'm so humble. I'm so honored and humbled. I'm so honored and humbled that Big Dwetch gave me this award. I've literally seen this. No, this is a warning. Because when we see things publicly, this is a warning. This is a warning. And when we see people do it, we should pray for them. We pray that Allah guides them and helps them, because this is a person who's in trouble. Right? So avoid the love of fame. If we become famous, being known and famous is not sinful. It's that you have a love to become famous. That's where it's sinful. There's no human being more famous than Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He's the most famous human being in history. No human being has been written about more than him. Sallallahu alaihi wa ala alihi wasallam. And the last point is, from our teachers tell us, remember death, dhikru maut. Everything in this world will eventually come to an end, including us. And this should be a reminder to us to keep our faith and intentions clean. And of this, we've been recommended to make ziyarah, or to visit the maqabir, to visit the cemeteries of the righteous, to make ziyarah, pray for them, but looking at them and understanding that we will be joining them. And this is part of our dua of the sunnah when we go and give salam to the Muslims in the graveyard, in the cemetery. And Sayyidina Ali, karamallahu ta'ala wajah, he said about this in visiting the graveyards, he's a very famous poem. They recited at Azhar. It starts off, and nafsun tabki ala dunya faqad alimat anna salamata fiha tarkun ma fiha. The nafs, the self, cries over the dunya because they know the only safety in it is leaving it. But then comes the grave afterwards, in the test of the grave, the questions of the grave. So that's it, my brothers and sisters in Islam. We will conclude with that. Now I have my colleague, Sister Noor, if you can bring your chair up here.